Welcome to The Check-In, a podcast by Telos, where we explore the headlines from Israel, Palestine, and across the world, wading into the complexity of seemingly intractable conflict to discover the power of peacemaking, to heal us, our community, and our world. This is your host, David Cadabot, checking in from Washington, D.C. In the past year, Telos has launched a new peacemaking travel experience in Ireland and Northern Ireland to see what we, as peacemakers, can learn from the history, movements, and current reality of the conflict in Northern Ireland. We're still in the early stages of this program, but we traveled with 5 different groups in 2024, and there's already a lot we've learned. We think the lessons we're gleaning from our travels in Ireland and Northern Ireland are so relevant for you all in our network. And today on the podcast, we're going to talk with some alumni of our recent trips, as well as our Telos organizing staff to learn more about it. And for those who are interested, we're actually now accepting registrations for an Northern Ireland trip happening this fall, September 5th through 13th. You can go to our website, telosgroup.org/travel, to get all of the details and to register. You can also ask us a question to find out more about the program, and we'll include that link in our show notes below as well. We think this program is such an important next step for peacemakers, especially in the moment that we're living in. And we're excited for you to hear a little bit more about it on the show today. Hello, and welcome to the check-in. We have an amazing group gathered here today. I'm so excited for you all to hear from these folks. We have Eli with us. Eli, where are you checking in from?
So I'm checking in today from Jerusalem, where I'm based, and very excited to talk about the Ireland trip, the Northern Ireland program with you all today.
We have 2 members of our board of directors here with us. We have our board chair, Bretta Warren Kim. Where are you checking in from this morning?
Hey, good morning, everybody, or whatever time it is near you. I am checking in from Inverness, Illinois, which is northwest suburban Chicago.
Wonderful. And our board member, Ainka Jackson, where are you checking in from?
Hi, everybody. I am checking in from the historic Selma, Alabama.
Amazing. Well, thank you for both for joining us this morning. You're here because not only are you just incredible people in your own rights, doing amazing work in the world, but also because you traveled with us to Ireland and Northern Ireland, this new program that we've been developing over a number of years, a peacemaking pilgrimage across the Republic of Ireland into Northern Ireland, or the north of Ireland, as some call it, as we learn on this trip. And we're here to talk about that experience, why it is such an important place to encounter these questions of how violence and conflict work, how they're healed, what reconciliation requires, where theology and Christianity have a role to play, not only in the perpetuation of violence, but also in its transformation. So we're so excited to hear your reflections on this experience. So Eli, before we dive in to hear more from Bretta and Ainka about their experiences, can you give us a little bit of an overview of the trip? Where do you go? Who do you meet with? What are some of the sites and places that you visit? And maybe a little bit more of the why. Why Ireland and Northern Ireland?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so we have a really wonderful trip, a really great itinerary. And our trip is first and foremost a peacemaking trip. So it's not exactly a tourist trip. Most of what we do is coming to learn about the history of Ireland, of Northern Ireland, to learn and understand the current reality, and critically to draw some lessons from what we see in Ireland, from what we learn about, to our own work back in the States or wherever we're from, with reconciliation, with justice, with peacemaking in general. So in terms of the itinerary, we spend most of our time in Northern Ireland, or the north of Ireland, as some say. But we actually start with a couple days in Dublin, in the Republic of Ireland. And for us, it's important to start here to get a broader contextualization of the conflict in the north, where we'll go later on in the trip. And the Republic only gained independence from the UK about 100 years ago. So we dive into that history of British colonization, into the Easter Rising, the War of Independence, to really understand that broader context when we continue. And Dublin is also a great place to experience Irish culture and tradition, which of course is lots of fun, but is also such a critical piece in understanding the past and the present and where we are. So we go explore Gaelic sports, attend traditional music sessions, of course, eat some great food, visit a whiskey distillery, and so on. And then from Dublin, we go right into the heart of the conflict. We drive up to Derry, or Londonderry, in Northern Ireland. So we cross the border into the UK, and we spend a couple nights there. And Derry is a wonderful little town, but it's also in many ways the home of the Troubles. It's where the civil rights movement began in the 1960s by Irish Catholics demanding equality. It's where the infamous Bloody Sunday massacre happened in the early 70s. And it was an epicenter of the Troubles. So we dig into all of that when we're in Derry. We meet with folks who were around back then. We visit incredible museums, but we also meet with community leaders who are continuing that work today, trying to get justice for victims, to uncover the truth, to rebuild and reconnect the communities that were divided. From Derry, we spent the rest of our time, about 4 nights, in Belfast. So Belfast is, of course, the capital, a major city in Northern Ireland, and it's also a divided city. There's walls until today separating Catholic and Protestant neighborhoods. Many areas are segregated still along ethnic lines. And we go to see that. We walk along the walls. We visit the different communities, the Shankill and Falls Road, very important communities. We get a sense of what it was like during the Trouble and what it's like really still today. But we also don't stay in the past. So when we're in Belfast, it's been 30 years since the signing of the Good Friday Agreement, of the peace agreement. And there's incredible community organizers, activists, teachers, faith leaders from Catholic and Protestant communities working within their communities and across the communities who are doing truly incredible work, completing that peace process, turning that agreement into a reality, and making it last. So we meet with folks who work on restorative justice, with former paramilitaries, with folks who use art to bridge communities across the entire cities. People are reimagining what a new identity, maybe a Northern Irish identity, could look like, and so on. So we really get a sense both of the history, the present, and also maybe what a future can look like. And throughout this all, we weave in the incredible natural scenery of Ireland, the coasts, the farmland, the culture, the food, the people, and really we get a holistic picture of Ireland, of Northern Ireland, of the conflict, of the history, of the present, and what this means for us when we're coming to learn from the incredible people that we meet with, and what lessons we can draw and take back to our context. So that's in a nutshell, or a very big nutshell.
I want to hear just a little bit about perhaps each of your backgrounds. You can share a little bit about, who you are and your story, and also perhaps what you knew about Northern Ireland and Ireland prior to going on this trip. It's not really, at least in my experience, a conflict, a context that many Americans know a whole lot about. So I'd be curious, kind of your story, and then where Ireland and Northern Ireland overlapped with that. And Bretta, why don't we start with you?
Sure. So for my day job, I work in a local community hospital. I'm a pathologist. I'm married. I have 6 kids, and I've traveled to Ireland and Northern Ireland with Telos in early December of 2024. I grew up in Illinois in the 70s and the 80s, or what my kids refer to as the 1900s. And I didn't study geopolitics or history, and it's not a hobby of mine. So I guess what's most true for me to say is that my sense of Ireland prior to traveling with Telos was kind of totally derived, for better or worse, from the arts. And by that I mean, songs, music, like U2's Bloody Sunday, the Cranberries, Zombie. They're both songs about the Troubles. Movies like Far and Away and Brooklyn are about Irish immigrants, or Belfast is another movie that was recently, that was an awesome movie about the Troubles. So I'm also not of Irish heritage, and so I don't have family stories that are passed down. So I guess what I knew about Ireland was honestly not much. But the arts kind of definitely left me with the sense that in Ireland, like in most places, history is long and complex, sometimes rough. Some hard stuff happened, and people were hurt and still are hurt, and maybe things still aren't really okay. The only thing I'd add to that is I definitely had a preconceived notion that the Troubles were primarily due to religious differences among Christian traditions. So that's kind of what I went there with.
Mm. Wow, that's such a helpful framework for us thinking about how story is so powerful to shape our conceptions of place and even ourselves, and where we come into these things, and how part of what these experiences are doing are giving us new stories to understand the people who we're connected to and may not realize we are connected to. But Ainka, I'm curious to hear more about what you came in with, and a little bit more about your background for listeners who haven't heard you on our show before.
So I am the executive director of the Selma Center for Nonviolence, Truth and Reconciliation, and we are one of the community partners with Telos, as well as being a board member, trying to better understand how these conflict zones and reconciliation, truth and reconciliation processes work in different areas. Traveled to Ireland with Telos. And I will say that I knew very little before studying to go. One of the things I really appreciate about how Telos does things is to encourage learning before you go to a place. But I knew very little. I knew that Ireland had a Bloody Sunday, like Selma had a Bloody Sunday before I went. Learned while I was there that many people viewed that there were more than one Bloody Sundays. And so knew very little and was saddened by the fact that in my lifetime, that something so serious was happening and nobody taught it, similar to the history of Selma not being taught in Selma. And so there's this tendency to want to just sweep conflict under the rug instead of really dealing with it and learning from it so we can heal from it. And so I knew very little about the conflict before studying prior to the trip, and eyes were wide open from hearing from people on all sides of the conflict.
Wow, that's really helpful, and I so appreciate the connections you're making between our own history in the U.S., history that happened in Selma, where you're from, and do your work around civil rights and the work of freedom, and the history of Northern Ireland, and the civil rights movement that happened in Northern Ireland. As part of this longer history, this 30-year period known as the Troubles. And the way in which some of the frameworks we even use to talk about that period are really challenging. Bretta, you brought up this kind of idea of a religious conflict between traditions, Catholics and Protestants, and how there's actually more to the story too. When we dive further back into history, we see that this 30-year period of conflict that was the Troubles actually extends many hundreds of years. When we think about British occupation into the island of Ireland and the way in which communities were displaced. Communities were subject to a hierarchy of human belonging. Some people were worth more than others, and that was institutionalized. And so it kind of bubbles up over many hundreds of years into this reality known as the Troubles. So there's so many aha moments that are going on. Ainka, you mentioned that. And I'd love to hear from both of you as you were walking the streets of Derry, going to the Free Dairy Museum, as we heard from Ellie, as you were walking the Peace Walls in Belfast, hearing from folks from all different communities across this island. What were some of those aha moments for you that stick out, that helped facilitate some of this learning about, wait, this is bigger than I realized, this is deeper than I realized, and we may need some new frameworks to engage this issue?
So I was really struck by the wall, of course, that so many people know. Art has such an amazing power to tell a story, to tell a story of peace, to tell a story of war, to tell a story of the need to heal. And I think that saw that very specifically in the different walls, because we saw the peace wall, but we saw other walls, and you could see a drastic difference in how the story was told and the values that were shared, in particular about what wanted to be promoted, right? Whether it was the victims or whether it was peace, whatever that particular story was. I also found it very interesting that the civil rights history led by African Americans in the States was brought into the peace wall as well. And so that was really powerful to see as well. And took the opportunity to share with one of our guides more about the history, because so often we see that people are inspired but not necessarily know the history. The Free Dairy Museum was truly heartbreaking to see the stories, to read the stories, to see the connections.
So, David, I love this question. I'm kind of a learned wildflower observer, kind of internal processor kind of person. So, if you ask me about internal echoes, I like to call them, or aha moments, it's simultaneously like an awesome question and so so challenging because I accumulate a lot of them along the way. So you will have to stop me or choose good ones. I would start with like a broad brushstroke and say something that it was always that impressed on me again is that 100% I can learn from anybody. And the best part about that is that the generosity of everyday folks is always available. So I left Ireland feeling such honor for the hearts of local folks. And that's Gaelic footballers and historians and bartenders and priests and tour guides, grade school teachers, formerly incarcerated soldiers and militia members, recent immigrants to Ireland, photographers, advocates, and like pub musicians just magically singing about Chicago, where I'm from. So, most folks in my experience, they want to generously share about life where they live. And it's such a huge gift. So that's a repeated aha for me on traveling with Telos.
And that's such a priority of ours, is those real personal encounters, because that's where so much of the transformation happens. I totally agree.
Yeah, just a couple of examples of that on this trip. First was just being invited to participate in a faith ritual, even as an outsider or a person of a different faith practice or no faith practice at all, just to be included in something that was clearly very sacred for our hosts was so generous and beautiful, like a beautiful taste of what could be if we allowed it more often. And second, also happened to be in a faith space, but it was a weekly Friday night dinner called the Lawn Table that our hosts at Redeemer Central Church in Belfast have, where they cook and eat together with their neighbors. And their neighbors happen to be college students from local campuses, immigrants to Ireland that are housed in local hotels in the area, and the queer community. And I just had an awesome meal with a guy who walked in off the street, who had a plastic bag full of fantasy novels from the local library and a bunch of tattoos and just tons of stories to tell over a really yummy dinner. And this was just not at all contrived. It was just real and very human and lovely. And it wouldn't have been if he and I just didn't show up kind of as is. And so again, it was just this beautiful taste of what could be if we looked out for it more often.
That's beautiful, especially this kind of openness to, one, listening to understand, but especially in the context of Ireland, Northern Ireland, this sense of like the other being welcomed in and invited to be heard. And in a physical space in Belfast where walls are literally dividing communities to this day, that table is this place of welcome of what could be, where everyone has a seat, everyone has a meal, and you get to break bread. That's a powerful experience. And for those who've been on our trips, they know the meals are so central to what we're doing. The food especially. Ireland and Northern Ireland get a bad rap sometimes for cuisine, I think often in culture, but it's about the food, and it's about more than the food too, as what you're saying.
Super warm and cozy and yummy and homey. Love it.
You had an experience with some panelists who come from different backgrounds. In fact, were former combatants in this conflict from opposing communities. Can you tell us about that experience and how you encountered that moment, what it said to you, and some is evocative of some of the kinds of encounters we do in Israel Palestine with combatants for peace, or the parent circle of people from communities who often are told to see each other as enemies coming together and sharing a new vision. What was that like for you? And who were you hearing from?
Yeah, so this experience and my kind of observation of it falls into a more meta observation, maybe about human nature, perhaps, but most specifically, it's true about me. And it's really helped me to lean into one of Telos's 12 principles and practices of peacemaking, which is self-interrogation. And it came during our group's meeting with three former combatants, as you mentioned, British military servicemen, Ulster Defense Force volunteers, so they would have been on the same quote side, as well as a former IRA member. And all of these guys had been previously incarcerated as, you might need to correct this, David, but I'm going to use the term, they were previously incarcerated as political prisoners and now choosing to work together for peace, a new and different way. And what struck me about listening to them was each of their insistence on being innocent, even though each just confessed to being incarcerated for murder. So they felt that the real guilt laid with the system that they were part of, their superiors, the folks that made the big decisions, and they were just doing what they were told. And they held fast to this idea of being, what came up in my head was of being innocent murderers. And that was striking for me. And I think this will be funny, but it's going to circle back to art in a way. It made my memory kind of circle back to the final scenes of a movie maybe a lot of listeners have seen called A Few Good Men, when like Tom Cruise's character, a JAG lawyer, is trying to get the system, Jeff Nicholson's Colonel Jessup, to admit that he'd ordered a code red. And this code red resulted in the death of a serviceman at the hands of two fellow soldiers, and they were the ones on trial for murder. In the end, with great drama about who can handle the truth, right, the system actually admits that it's guilty. And so then, by the rationale of this amazing trio of panelists that we listened to in Ireland, if the system was guilty and held accountable, then they shouldn't also have to be. And in fact, it should prove that they were innocent. But the Marines in this movie were actually also found guilty, and they were removed from service for conduct unbecoming a Marine, right? So the message for the movie watchers was, even when the system commands you to cause harm, you can still do what's right, even when it costs you. It's easy to judge, these movie characters or these three panelists. The harder part is acknowledging what I myself am complicit in and blind to every day. So this notion of being individually complicit in a group harm is so rough. It's such a hard one. We all avoid it. No one wants to ask these questions of ourselves. But what we do instead is we see it in the actions out there of other people or other groups. And we easily scapegoat them. We cancel our friends, we cancel our family, we cancel our enemies, rather than, looking to the system that we've kind of all bought into. So that's kind of the broader observation I made, which is a really hard one. Folks can read about the scapegoat mechanism written about by, I think, Renee Girard, or the cult of innocence. I think Nadia Bowles-Weber and Richard Rohr have written about that a little bit. You can find it online. It's just like any good 12-stepper working the steps. If we can't admit to some of these things out there that are also in here.
If we can't admit to what's in here, how can we be participating in a real transformative work that allows our so-called enemies to be healed alongside of us and to flourish alongside of us? I think that self-interrogation work is so critical, and it's so difficult. And we can see how when we don't create space for folks across all communities, whatever their participation in justice and harm, to find new ways to belong to have meaning and significance in their lives alongside of us and the new beloved community that we're creating, then we'll continue to hold on to these narratives, these rationales for the ways we participated in conflict and violence. Because without them, then we may be exiled, right? We may be excluded. We may be told that our value, our dignity, our worth no longer exists. And so there's a self-interrogation work to know, I participate in this, and how can I build the beloved community such that even my enemy can belong alongside me, and they can let go of this old identity that is a part of providing something very human, but ultimately is participating in their own destruction and in the destruction of others. So I think that's a really important point, and something, that I was wrestling with a lot is like, what is identity in these spaces of conflict and violence, and how do we move towards a new kind of identity that acknowledges where we come from and our heritage and the beauty of it, and then but is able to let go of some of these narratives that are there to reinforce ultimately a kind of hierarchy or supremacy or need to justify violence. Ainka, I know we heard some of your ahas, and then I think we got cut off. So I don't know if you heard any of that, you had any responses or any other ahas that you wanted to share, but we can circle back to that now.
So often when there's conflict, there's just such a need for it to end, and which is understandable, right? Because it's at a height. We just want to be done and move on with our lives, that we often miss the steps to actually get to reconciliation. And I think that we did that with the Civil War here in the United States, right? We allowed people to just sort of carry on with their own narratives, which perpetuated the false narratives of the hierarchy of human value without actually dealing with those false narratives, right? We never really had a truth and reconciliation process. And I believe similarly that happened in the Republic of Ireland. And so one of the quotes that stood out to me most was, it was something, this is a slight paraphrase, but one of the people said, "The peace process stopped us from killing each other, but didn't teach us how to heal and live with each other." The residual things like bridging divides didn't happen. And so they're not really post-conflict. You could still literally, it was palpable. You could still feel it in the air. The divisions were still very real because these religions weren't just religions, they were identity. And so when you're dealing with people's identity, and you don't do anything about this false narrative of a hierarchy of human value so that you can see people differently, view people differently, live with people differently, so you can heal differently, the conflict just continues. And just because people aren't murdering each other doesn't mean people aren't dying inside, right? And so really the need to do the healing work. That same person said that there are more suicides happening now than during the conflict. Than murders during the conflict. That's an extreme, right? That during a war, you have more suicides now than you had murders during the war, right? That means that there's healing that has to be done, right? And we can't just, move on our way out of that. We have to do the deep work of truth and reconciliation. Now, unarmed truth, as Dr. King discussed, but we have to do that work.
Mm. That's such a powerful point, Ainka, of the way in which participating in hierarchy and supremacy and violence is spiritually and even physically self-destructive. That even if, we're not the ones who are receiving the harm of the injustice, of systemic injustice, of structural injustice, there's a harm to us that happens when we participate in this. And we're seeing that play out today, and that this work of healing, of resisting injustice, of pursuing peace is for everyone's liberation and for everyone's flourishing. That's such an important point, and we saw this so deeply in Ireland and Northern Ireland. And one of the things that really shocked me with that, kind of going off what you said, is that during the Troubles and even preceding them, these communities would build huge structures of walls to divide themselves. Protestants on one side and Catholics on the other. And today, I believe folks want those walls to stay more than they did even before, or that they're more committed to these walls than ever, which coming out of 27 years next week from the Good Friday Agreement, this political arrangement that ended the conflict, that disarmed these communities, to have those walls be more important is a shocking realization. And it goes exactly to what you're saying, that there's real healing, real reconciliation that needs to go alongside the political arrangements, this transformation of structural injustice. And I think that's such a word for our communities back home. I think many of us want to see structural justice happen, systemic justice happen in our communities, but are so ready to throw out relationships along the way, to let people be discardable along the way. And what we're hearing and learning from Ireland, Northern Ireland, is that that's not possible. That's not a path towards the beloved community. So I'm curious from both of you, as we wrap up, what are some of the things that you're taking back that you feel are relevant for your peacemaking work or activism here in the U.S.? And how might we continue to be advocating and standing in solidarity with our new friends from Ireland and Northern Ireland as well?
One person said that, this man named Pierce, he said, with time, the scars are sort of setting in instead of healing. And we often hear the saying, time heals all wounds. And they're saying it doesn't. It's building more walls. And so we have to intentionally do the work of tearing down walls. And we often build walls for protection, not realizing that they often can be the very thing that causes danger. And so the real work is not walls, it's relationship, right? There's an African proverb that says, if you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go far, go together. And it's slower, right? Because it takes longer because you have to do more work. You have to do the internal work and the interpersonal work. And so it's slower, but you get to go far. And so there are people in this country and those countries who want to go far and are trying to figure out how to go far together. And that is difficult work. This man named Paul Hutchinson, he says, it's not possible to sprint for peace. And so it's going to take work and it's going to take time. It's not a sprint. We're in for the long haul to get to peace.
Yeah, one thing, David, that a quote that I wrote down in my journal while we were there is that oftentimes the hardest part of peacemaking isn't meeting with your perceived other, but it's actually bringing your own people along with you, which felt quite poignant. And so for me, what that meant in coming back home is for me to keep showing up in spaces where I have this preconceived notion or bias that might be filled with folks who think or feel or believe differently than I do. It often comes down to a challenge to, I have to balance, is this a challenge to my ego or is this a challenge to my integrity? So I carry and work through both of those things, but I will say humans will surprise you, for sure, for good and sometimes for poor. But I just I thought that quote was encouraging for me to continue to bet on the good, because what I look for, I will find more often than I think I will. So it was a reminder to cancel no one, as hard as that feels like it is sometimes, write off no one, as hard as it is sometimes.
Those are powerful invitations, folks, and I'm just struck by the both of you, the way you commit to not just seeing the possibility of beloved community, but you are the beloved community, or building the beloved community day by day by committing to relationship, by committing to this long work, by committing to showing up even when it's hard, even when you're tired, acknowledging the rest you need to do that, and taking care of yourself in the ways you need for this long haul, because it isn't a sprint, it's a marathon, right? And Ainka, what you said, if we want to go far, we go together. I think about that across these contexts too, because one of the things we're learning at Telos is that across these contexts that we work in Israel, Palestine, in the US South, in Ireland, in Northern Ireland, recently we went to South Africa, We've gone to Puerto Rico a couple of times even. These contexts, these struggles are so deeply interwoven. Some of the same forces that enable conflict and violence and injustice in Palestine, the West Bank, and Gaza, and elsewhere, are modeled after systems that were developed in the US and that were developed in South Africa from that. And even when we walk Ireland and Northern Ireland, we see Israeli and Palestinian flags everywhere, right? And so these struggles, these situations are interconnected. And so we heal through them through relationship too, through solidarity across these contexts. And so one of the things that we're so excited about is to get folks from these contexts into conversation with each other, learning from each other, and ultimately healing together our world from these damaging forces of supremacy, of these hierarchies of human belonging, of the damages and ravages of colonialism and all of these forces. And it's only together will we be able to move towards that beloved community and be that beloved community in the process. So I just want to thank you both for your commitment to that work, for your time on the show, for sharing some of these insights and aha moments that you had. And I want to give you just a brief minute to share any final words of insight or recommendation for folks considering to join this upcoming trip we have in September. Any final thoughts for our listeners?
One of the other people that we saw there, he said, don't try to understand really quickly because you'll probably half understand. And so I just want to encourage us all as we seek understanding, whether it's of the context in Israel and Palestine, whether it's the context in Ireland, whether it's in our own home or own neighborhood in our own country. Don't seek to understand so quickly because you'll probably understand only half right.
That's great. I feel like what I'm about to share is a parallel of that. That's so cool. I love it. It's magic. I was just going to encourage people to remember or think about for the first time that my point of view, your point of view, maybe like it or not, is unique. It's human-sized, and it's just that. It's a view from the single point that you inhabit within your body. And it's going to be your point of view among the whole sphere of the globe filled with billions of single points of view. And so life is really this magic of being willing to look at your life and other lives from close up, in proximity, maybe from farther away to see a bigger picture. Are you going this alone? Or as Ainka mentioned, are you doing it together? Are you thinking from an old point of view, or are you willing to also listen to fully understand and be present with folks around you? Because ultimately, I'm living a life that I feel like is true. Your neighbor is living a life that they feel is true, and both are. And both of our stories are actually part of an even bigger story. So life is humbling and beautiful and hard. And when we can learn to see the world really as it is, that's when we can take the next step, a step that's uniquely ours to take in making something better.
And can I just say, we can't see the world as it really is without each other. And we often think that my truth means that you're wrong, but multiple truths can be true at once, right? And so we get to see the fullness of what the truth is by being in relationship with each other, which takes time and takes relationship. And so I really do think we could have world peace if we really believe that there could be multiple truths at once. And just because my truth is different from yours doesn't mean that one of us is wrong. Sometimes both of us are wrong. Sometimes both of us are right. But when we come together, we can literally create the picture that is more just, more right, more righteous. But we have to do it together versus separate from one another.
Absolutely. Our futures are so deeply intertwined. Our flourishing is intertwined and our freedom is intertwined. And so we have to find that future, pursue that freedom together. Thanks for those invitations and the invitation to discover what that work is for each of us alongside of each other. We can't do this alone. Folks, we have our upcoming Northern Ireland tour, September 5th through 13th. Coming up this fall. You can find more information about that on our website at teloscoop.org/travel. You can sign up for that. You can bring a friend, we'd love for you to join us and encounter these stories to do the long, arduous, but joyous work of peacemaking alongside of our new friends in Ireland and Northern Ireland. Bretta and Ainka, thanks so much for being on the show.
Thank you for the invitation.
Yes.
Awesome. Folks, you can leave a rating and review on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. It really helps our show reach new listeners. Become a donor to Telos. This happens because of the generosity of folks like you listening to this show. And thank you for listening. We'll see you next time.